These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. A United States Marine in Hue, Vietnam, photographed by Don McCullen in 1968. This stark look helped change how people saw the conflict. A German Zeppelin with the code L-20, nicknamed the Raider of Loughborough, leans into the sea after a long mission in the First World War. This class could be over 160 meters long and glide across the North Sea in one night. Two villagers in Ukraine dig for food during the winter famine of 1932 to 1933. Historians estimate about 4 million victims, and many records hid the truth for years. In the Lodz ghetto, photographer Mendel Grossman caught a lone girl standing in a courtyard as crowds lined the sides. His hidden work gives a rare inside view of ghetto life during the war. Stefan Bibrowski, known as the Lion Man, had a rare genetic condition that covered him in thick hair. His mane reached about 8 inches, and he toured Europe and America as a famous stage performer. John Lewis holds his head after troopers forced back a peaceful march on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma on March 7, 1965. Live television from that day helped lead to the Voting Rights Act later in 1965. A soldier leaves the 34th Street bus terminal in New York on December 7, 1941, as leave ends after the news from Pearl Harbor. A friend lifts his girlfriend for one last kiss before a world war changed life for millions. Most of the famous heads on Easter Island are full statues with buried bodies carved from volcanic rock. Some rise more than 10 meters, and their hidden backs hold ancient carvings revealed by careful digs. The wreck in a Paris tunnel is the car that carried Princess Diana on August 31, 1997. The crash shocked the world and sparked new talks about press safety and driver rules. The ruins of Urakami Cathedral in Nagasaki after the nuclear detonation of August 9, 1945. The site stood about 500 meters from the center, and the cathedral was rebuilt in 1959. A disputed image said to show Abraham Lincoln on the night at Ford's Theater in April 1865. Experts are split, and no confirmed post-mortem photo of the president is known, so the mystery endures. Harlan David Sanders, the man in the white suit, began Kentucky Fried Chicken by cooking for travelers at his Kentucky service station in the 1930s. He guarded a blend of 11 herbs and spices and spread his restaurants across America. John Grizzly Adams sits with a trained bear in 1856 on the American frontier. A head injury from a bear troubled him for years, yet his frontier shows made him a legend. Aleister Crowley stands with his wife and child in 1910. The British writer and explorer later became known for bold ideas and secret rites that stirred artists and rumors. Soldiers stand outside the brick courthouse at Appomattox as leaders write the terms on April 9, 1865. The meeting between Grant and Lee ended the main fighting and set a quiet path to reunion. Desmond Doss stands on the Maeda Escarpment in Okinawa in 1945. The medic saved about 75 men without carrying a weapon and later received the Medal of Honor. The southern coast of New Guinea, near the mangrove flats where Michael Rockefeller vanished in 1961. After his boat overturned, he tried to swim for shore, and despite huge searches, no trace was ever confirmed. A soldier with a sword in Nanjing in 1937 during the city's fall. Records suggest up to 350,000 lives were lost, and the memory still shapes East Asia today. Pete Spence, seen in an 1883 mugshot, was a frontier figure tied to the case of Morgan Earp in Arizona. Though named in the case, he later served about 18 months of a 5-year term before a governor's pardon. During the Dust Bowl, jackrabbits swarmed Kansas fields and ate scarce crops. Communities held large roundups in 1935, herding thousands to protect farms. Confiscated crates of alcohol are stacked like a wall in Chicago during Prohibition. Raids shut many secret bars and poured out millions of gallons across the nation. Miners in Goldfield worked deep inside the rock in the early 1900s. By August 1904, The mines made about $10,000 a day. But the boom faded, and a great fire in 1923 ruined much of the town. Elvis performs in 1957 as fans reach for the stage. His dance moves were so new that some shows filmed him only from the waist up on television. Martin Luther King Jr. speaks at Soldier Field in Chicago on July 10, 1966, during the Chicago Freedom Movement. The push for fair homes, transit, and health care in the North helped pave the way for open housing rules in 1968. National Guard soldiers face residents in Newark, New Jersey in July 1967. Unrest after an arrest lasted 6 days and helped prompt the Kerner Commission in 1968 to study urban inequality. At Altamont on December 6, 1969, Hell's Angels hired for security fought in the crowd with pool cues. The chaotic day during a Rolling Stones show ended with one fan losing his life, a dark turn for the 60s idealism. Kansans wear dust masks during the Dust Bowl to guard their lungs from dust pneumonia. On Black Sunday in 1935, storm clouds turned day into night across the plains. A wooden gallows stands at Ordruf, a subcamp near Gotha, in April 1945. Days later, U.S. forces reached the site, and their reports helped reveal the system to the world. A family stands outside a log home in New Mexico in 1895. A Native American caregiver holds their child, a quiet glimpse of daily life on the frontier. A Soviet school in 1931 trained dogs to carry charges toward tanks. In real battles, the moving noise confused many dogs, and plans failed. Barnes Wallis stands beside a test model of the British bouncing bomb, a 9,000-pound cylinder made to skip across water and sink before detonation. In May 1943, the Royal Air Force used it in the dam raids on Germany. An officer on the United States Navy carrier Bennington writes, "For Gael on a bomb in May 1945. Many crews wrote short notes on bombs as a ritual for morale and to honor friends." United States soldiers moved through the ruins near the cathedral in Cologne in April 1945. The tall spires survived, while most of the city lay in rubble as the war neared its end. 4 women stand at a convention of former slaves in Washington, D.C. Many who gathered sought pensions and to record their life stories for the nation. Laika, a stray from Moscow, is fitted into a spacesuit before the Sputnik 2 launch in Kazakhstan in 1957. She became the first living creature to orbit Earth, and her flight taught engineers how to build life support for later human missions. A patient at Walter Reed General Hospital stands with a plaster cast of his face used to shape a custom mask and guide surgeons. These casts helped restore faces for injured service members and advanced modern reconstructive care. Bruce Lee speaks with producer Fred Weintraub on the set of Enter the Dragon in 1973. The film became a worldwide hit and turned martial arts movies into a global wave. Neighbors pick through rubble after a raid in Britain. A flag still waves from the wall. Between 1940 and 1945, air raids damaged millions of homes, yet streets often reopened within hours. Tsar Bomba was tested in the Soviet Union in 1961, with a yield near 50 megatons and a cloud rising about 60 kilometers. The shock wave traveled so far, it circled the planet more than once. Captured members of Brigade 2506 stand in line after the failed Bay of Pigs, landing in Cuba in April 1961. Most were freed the next year in a trade for food and medicine worth about $53 million. An American helicopter pilot runs from a wreck in Vietnam in early 1965. That year brought the first large wave of United States bombing and troops, turning the conflict into a long war. Muhammad Ali stands over Sonny Liston after a first-round finish in Lewiston on May 25, 1965, as referee Joe Walcott steps in. Many still debate the so-called Phantom Punch, and the image became one of sport's most famous. Survivors gather near the barracks at Buchenwald on April 16, 1945, days after United States forces arrived. Their words and photos helped the world learn what happened. Young women of the Hehalitz movement stand after capture during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943. They hid weapons in their boots and used homemade bottles in the revolt, a rare image of youth resistance. Sir Hiram Maxim holds his experimental aircraft engine around 1894. It weighed about 300 pounds, yet was the lightest of its time, pushing early flight forward. Dorothea Lange sits on her car in California in 1936. She later photographed the forced removal of Japanese Americans, and many of those images were kept from public view for over 50 years. A Japanese American mother with her children waits during removal in 1942, photographed by Dorothea Lange. More than 110,000 people were forced from West Coast homes and sent to camps under wartime orders. James Watson and Francis Crick stand with their DNA model in 1953 at Cambridge. Their double helix idea unlocked how genes copy and sparked modern genetics. German forces pushed toward Moscow in the freezing winter of 1941 to 1942, seen from a tank crew view. Cold and long supply lines stalled the drive, and a Soviet counterattack forced a retreat. Smoke rises over Watts in Los Angeles during 6 days of unrest that began on August 11, 1965. About 4,000 Guard members were called, and losses reached $40 million. An American soldier moves past a burning base at Mytho on April 5, 1968. The city lies in the Mekong Delta, where canals and thick growth turned every move into a slow, careful push. A playful blueprint for Agent 86's shoe phone from the show Get Smart in 1964. The joke gadget oddly foretold wearable tech and tiny phones we carry today. A man climbs up from a hidden floor space in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1943. Secret bunkers linked by tunnels helped fighters and families hide during the uprising. A mannequin family sits in a basement shelter about 7,500 feet from a nuclear test in Nevada in 1953. Operation Doorstep measured how basements and sturdy walls could raise survival odds. A survivor reaches from a lifeboat after fleeing Singapore in 1942, photographed by Frank Noel. His plea for water became a Pulitzer Prize image and a stark symbol of survival. At a Tinker Air Show, a bomber crossed a biplane smoke trail earlier than planned, and the two came within about 5 feet. More than 60,000 people watched as both pilots steadied their craft, and the show went on. In 1951, Drake star Johnny Bright had his jaw broken by a late hit against Oklahoma A&M, captured in a famous photo series. The outrage sped the use of face guards on helmets, and Bright later became a legend in Canadian football. The first aerial news photo shows a bomber crash in a city neighborhood. Its propeller jammed, and the crew steered away from homes before they died. The liner Andrea Doria rolls and sinks after a collision with the ship Stockholm in 1956, about 50 miles from the coast. Calm seas and fast rescue saved most on board, though 46 lives were lost. A Cuban priest gives last rites to Colonel Rodriguez in 1959 as rebels stand guard after a 1-minute tribunal found him guilty of abuses under Batista. Most film from the trial was seized, but a few frames like this survived and shaped how the world saw the revolution. Coretta Scott King holds daughter Bernice at Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral in April 1968. She later founded the King Center and helped make his birthday a national holiday in the United States. A farm worker carries a bushel through Florida bean rows, part of the migrant labor stream in the mid-20th century. Seasonal crews followed harvests for piece-rate pay, living in roadside camps and sending money home. Early Norwegian sea rescue crews rigged cork or wood blocks along their whaleboats so survivors could grab flotation in heavy surf. Those same blocks soon became strapped life belts, a practical step toward the modern life jacket used worldwide. Amelia Earhart shakes hands with her husband George Putnam in Miami on June 1, 1937, before departing in her Lockheed Electra to circle the globe near the equator. A month later, she vanished near Howland Island, triggering the largest air-sea search of its time and a mystery that still invites new clues today. At 02:56 UTC on July 21, 1969, Neil Armstrong made the first human footprint on the moon, a moment watched live by about 600 million people. The fuzzy lines come from slow-scan TV that had to be converted on the ground, which blurred this world first as it was broadcast. Minutes before dawn on December 7, 1941, carriers north of Oahu waved off the first of 353 aircraft, launched in 2 waves from Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku to strike Pearl Harbor. Scientists hoist the gadget up a 100-foot tower at the Trinity site in New Mexico, hours before the first controlled atomic test in July 1945. The pre-dawn blast released energy equal to about 21,000 tons of TNT and quietly opened the atomic age. Little Italy, New York, early 1900s. Women load baskets with fresh loaves from a pushcart, the daily staple for crowded tenement families. Many households spent most of their income on food, so street markets helped immigrants stretch every cent while keeping old-world flavors alive. March 11 to 14, 1888. The Great White Hurricane buried the Northeast with up to 50 inches of snow, drifts near 50 feet, and winds around 85 miles per hour. Railroads stopped, telegraph lines failed. In a Soviet labor camp dormitory, boys watch from stacked bunks as slogans hang over the aisle, a quiet look at daily life behind the barbed wire. The city name Molotov, now Perm, was used from 1940 to 1957. An early replica of Alexander Graham Bell's telephone shows how a vibrating diaphragm and magnet turned a person's voice into an electric signal. In 1876, he made the first successful call, saying, "Mr. Watson, come here," and launched the era of long-distance talking. America's M1917 was a near clone of the French Renault FT, the first tank with a fully rotating turret and rear engine layout that shaped all modern designs. Built too late for World War I, it spent the 1920s in training and occasional domestic duty during periods of civil unrest. Early 1920s. Belgian orphan boys polish sturdy boots gifted by the Junior Red Cross of America, a school-based drive that shipped clothing and shoes across Europe. Weimar Berlin loved spectacle. Late 1920s cabarets staged surreal bed shows where masked models lounged on real beds to advertise fashion and nightlife. April 4, 1912. A passing vessel photographed pack ice and high bergs drifting south in the North Atlantic along the liner's planned route. In the following days, multiple wireless ice warnings went out, yet the ship maintained about 22 knots that night on a dark. Junior wireless operator Harold Bride kept sending CQD and the new SOS with Jack Phillips until the power failed. Then, despite injured feet, helped run Carpathia's radio to relay survivor messages. This photo shows him being carried ashore in New York on April 18, 1912. Stanislav, now Ivano-Frankivsk, held a formal parade in 1943 under German occupation to honor Governor-General Hans Frank. Riders in traditional dress pass reviewing officials beneath party banners, a staged display of authority across occupied Poland. London, 1900. A mother and her children assemble matchboxes at home for a factory, paid by the piece and earning pennies per hundred. Home-based piecework like this was common in East End tenements until later labor reforms moved production into regulated workshops. Joseph Dusorc of Béarn, France was officially measured at 2.30 meters tall during military conscription in 1903 at age 20. He became widely known through postcard portraits and public showings before his death in 1912. In 1929, volunteers of women and children unfurled a giant American flag across the steps of the United States Capitol for a patriotic ceremony. The massive banner, stitched from many panels, showcased how civic groups helped stage national events between the two world wars. March 1961, Reddington Beach, Florida. Marilyn Monroe relaxes in the sun with her former husband, baseball star Joe DiMaggio, while recovering from a recent health setback. They had married in 1954 and divorced after 9 months. An unusual concert, Obraztsov Puppet Theater's hit revue, captured backstage in Moscow in 1971 by photographer Yevgeny Umnov, with actor Zinovy Gert at center. Premiered in 1946, the show became the theater's global calling card, touring widely and running for decades. In 1933, Germany's new chancellor drew vast crowds at party rallies, just as the United States ended prohibition with the 21st Amendment. 1 year, 2 opposite pivots. Tighter control in Europe, legal beer and spirits back in America. Chaplin confers on set with cinematographer Roland Totherow, whose lens defined the look of Chaplin's silent-era films. Beside them stands Stan Laurel, years before his famous partnership with Oliver Hardy. Brando's film debut, The Men, in 1950, cast him as a World War II veteran adjusting to life in a wheelchair. To nail the role, he lived for weeks in a VA hospital and used a wheelchair off camera to study real routines and attitudes. Newlyweds walk through the ruined center of Beirut, Lebanon, in 1983, taking wedding photos amid a city damaged by years of civil strife. The scene became a striking emblem of resilience during the Lebanese Civil War. NATO foreign ministers in 1954 rejected the USSR's bid to join, arguing the request was incompatible with the alliance's principles and structure. That same spring, they advanced West Germany's entry instead, a pivotal step that hardened Cold War lines on both sides. Dachau, April 29, 1945. Hours after U.S. forces arrived, inmates confronted a camp guard in the courtyard. The stark background, evidence of that day's fighting, shows how quickly control collapsed at liberation. A Cadillac Coupe de Ville idles before the shattered presidential palace in Grozny during winter 1995, at the height of the First Chechen War. The stark contrast, U.S. luxury steel against a scarred landmark of the Chechen capital, captures the city's upheaval that years. Los Angeles, May 3, 1992. A U.S. Marine stands watch outside a Compton supermarket during the city's unrest. Deployed to support local authorities, troops safeguarded essential stores as residents navigated curfews and supply lines. Joe Biden in 1966, age 23, while studying at Syracuse University College of Law. That same year, he married Nelia Hunter. 6 years later, he entered the United States Senate, starting the path to the 46th presidency. Dian Fossey sits beside Digit, the silverback who trusted her in the Virunga Mountains during the 1970s. Digit died defending his group from poachers on New Year's Eve, sparking worldwide support for guerrilla protection. Civil Air Patrol student pilot relaxes on a trainer at Silver Lake Airfield near Baker, California, in 1944. CAP volunteers flew more than 500,000 hours on coastal patrol and search and rescue, freeing military pilots for frontline duty. Japanese troops take cover on a Shanghai street as a Chinese tank approaches during the Battle of Shanghai in 1937. The clash was the first major urban battle of the Second Sino-Japanese War, foreshadowing the intense city fighting to come. Exhausted German soldiers stumble back from close quarters fighting in Ukraine in 1943. One at right grips an MP-40 while the man in front still clutches his entrenching tool. After the Battle of Kursk that summer, German forces began a broad retreat across Ukraine as the Red Army seized the initiative. Chernobyl liquidators clear ultra-hot debris by hand on the roof of Reactor 4 in 1986 after remote machines failed. Each biorobot had only 40 to 90 seconds in the zone, wearing makeshift lead gear while shoveling graphite off the roof. American prisoners of war line up for roll call at Na Tu So Prison in Hanoi in March 1973, weeks after the Paris Peace Accords. Many of these men would be flown home under Operation Homecoming within days, ending years of captivity. Kuwaiti firefighters and international teams raced to seal a blazing well in 1991, one of more than 600 torched during the retreat from Kuwait. Crews used water cannons, bulldozers, and explosive blowouts to snuff flames before capping each well. Soviet crews decontaminate cars leaving the Chernobyl exclusion area in 1986. Vehicles were scrubbed with foam and chemical solutions at checkpoints to reduce surface radiation before returning to public roads. In 1946, an elderly woman searches for the emperor while Hirohito himself walks beside her during his nationwide tour. The occupation arranged these humanization visits because many Japanese had never seen his face after years of state myth and limited public images. John T. Thompson poses with his prototype submachine on August 12, 1916, a design he dubbed the trench broom for close-quarters use on the Western Front. World War I ended before it was fielded, but production began in 1921, and the Thompson soon became a Prohibition-era icon. At a Moscow reception, Soviet basketball star Arvydas Sabonis personally asked Mikhail Gorbachev for permission to play abroad. Approval followed, and he spent the 1989 to 1990 season in Spain. Santa Marta, Colombia, 12th of November 1928. Striking United Fruit Workers rallied for fair pay and an 8-hour day. The protest turned tragic, with reports ranging from dozens to over 1,000 lives lost. Robert Wadlow, 8 feet 11 inches tall, visited Folsom Prison in 1939 while touring as a spokesman for the International Shoe Company. His custom shoes were size 37AA, and he was just 21 years old on this stop of a 300-city tour. Vienna, 1938. Paramilitary guards barred Jewish students from the University of Vienna after Austria's annexation. Within months, over a third of the faculty were removed under racial laws, and thousands of students were expelled or fled. September 22, 1989, the 41st U.S. President, George H.W. Bush, accidentally stepped on First Lady Barbara Bush's foot while boarding at Andrews Air Force Base. Air Force One isn't a specific plane, but the call sign used for any U.S. Air Force aircraft when the president is aboard. May 9, 1955, New York. Japanese women injured in the 1945 Hiroshima blast arrived for reconstructive surgery. Known as the Hiroshima Maidens, 25 patients underwent dozens of operations funded by American donors in a rare post-war humanitarian partnership. Siam, modern Thailand, 1877. Travelers ride in a domed rattan howdah strapped to a padded saddle while a mahout guides the elephant. Before railways reached the interior, these howdahs moved nobles, goods, and mail across forests and rivers, with crews balancing the load and tending the animal. In 1938, Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, and Italy's King Victor Emmanuel III watched field exercises together, an open display of the Rome-Berlin alignment. 1 year later, they formalized it with the Pact of Steel in May 1939, binding their militaries and paving the way for wider conflict. A lone sentry gazes over a cloud-filled valley on the Italian front, where positions in the Dolomites rose above 2,500 meters. This white war forced troops to tunnel through ice and set charges in glaciers, with cold and altitude causing more casualties than combat. John Liver Eater Johnson, a famed mountain man of the American West, was photographed here in the late 19th century. After his wife's death in 1847, frontier lore claims he spent years seeking revenge against members of the Crow Nation. West Berliners pass food and drinks to East German border guards through a hole in the wall on November 10, 1989, the day after the border opened. In the first weekend alone, about 2 million East Germans crossed into West Berlin, turning checkpoints into spontaneous street parties. U.S. Army MPs toast bread over molten lava during Mount Vesuvius's eruption in March 1944 near Naples. The eruption grounded many Allied planes and coated nearby towns in ash, so troops briefly turned the heat into a field kitchen moment. Women of Britain's ambulance service moved through debris just after a V-2 rocket struck London in 1945. The missiles arrived without warning at supersonic speed, and these crews rushed in to triage, evacuate, and keep the city going. Chicago, 1890s. Foundry crews guide long ladles to fill rows of ingot molds carved into sand beds as sunlight cuts through the smoky hall. Those iron ingots became rails, bridges, and early skyscraper frames, powering the city's steel-fueled boom. South Vietnam, 1966. Miss World Rata Faria of India signs a soldier's cap during a morale visit. She was the first Asian Miss World and later turned down showbiz to practice medicine. New York, 1970s. Moondog, the Viking of 6th Avenue, stands on East 51st Street in his signature horned cloak. A blind composer and inventor of instruments like the trimba, he influenced minimalist music and inspired jazz greats. June 1944, Omaha Beach. A U.S. Army chaplain celebrates Mass from a Jeep altar for troops just after the Normandy landings. Portable field kits let chaplains serve thousands across the beachhead, lifting morale during the advance into France. On December 16, 1960, a United DC-8 and a TWA Super Constellation collided while approaching Idlewild and LaGuardia, with wreckage falling in Park Slope, Brooklyn, and on Staten Island. The disaster led to major U.S. air traffic reforms, including stricter radar separation after 134 lives were lost. NYPD detained a young man after a reckless round of so-called Russian roulette ended his girlfriend's life. New York City, February 8, 1983. The incident became a headline cautionary tale about firearm negligence and youth risk in the early 1980s. A U.S. Marine braces as bombardment pounds defensive lines on Iwo Jima, February 1945. The 36-day campaign targeted about 11 miles of tunnels on a volcanic island, later used as an emergency landing site by over 2,000 B-29s. Soviet paratroopers test a strap-on glider wingsuit meant to let troops glide farther from the drop zone, 1935. Trials proved hard to control and dangerous on landing, so the concept was shelved until modern wingsuits reappeared decades later. A young father in Leningrad cradles his swaddled newborn in 1985. An ordinary family moment frozen before history took unexpected turns. A Finnish woman bakes bread in the lone surviving hearth of her ruined home after a partisan raid. Continuation War, 1941. SA Kuva photographers captured this stark resilience on Finland's eastern front. A Japanese soldier lights a cigarette for a Soviet prisoner during the Khalkhin Gol fighting in 1939 on the Mongolian steppe. The clashes ended with a Soviet-Mongolian victory and a ceasefire that pushed Japan to turn south in World War II. Japanese-American children in San Pedro, California, April 5, 1942, being taken to a War Relocation Authority Center under Executive Order 9066. Two-thirds of those sent away were U.S. citizens, and families could bring only what they carried. Taiwan, January 1969. Republic of China Marines train with flamethrowers during a field exercise. These systems projected fuel roughly 40-50 meters, a bunker clearing tactic common in mid-20th century warfare. March 18, 1965. Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov makes history with the first spacewalk from Voskhod 2, spending 12 minutes outside on a safety tether. His suit ballooned so badly he could not fit back through the hatch until he bled off pressure, an improvised fix that saved the mission. April 1945. German officers sit by the Reichsautobahn as U.S. vehicles cruise a highway network the regime built for rapid troop movement in the 1930s. Those high-speed roads became ready-made supply routes for the advancing Allies. August 14, 1962, Italian and French tunnelers met beneath Mont Blanc, their headings from Courmayeur and Chamonix aligning within inches after years of drilling. The 11.6-kilometer Mont Blanc tunnel opened in 1965, creating a direct transalpine road link between Italy and France. December 1941. In Los Angeles, a little Tokyo shopkeeper closes his store to enlist in the U.S. Army just after the Pearl Harbor attack. Months later, thousands of Japanese Americans served while their families were sent to inland wartime camps such as Manzanar. Playboy Club bunnies visit veterans at Fort Howard VA Hospital in Baltimore in 1965, part of the era's frequent charity appearances by club staff. The mix of pop culture glamour and VA recreation programs aimed to lift morale for long-term patients. Kyiv doctors ride a bus to Chernobyl on April 27, 1986, the morning after the reactor accident. They rush to Pripyat's clinics with minimal protection, running emergency triage and recording the first radiation exposures. Bedouins rest by a campfire on the Sinai Peninsula in 1929, their camels kneeling in the dark after a night caravan. These nomads navigated by stars and brewed strong coffee over coals while moving goods along routes linking the Red Sea, Gaza, and Cairo. Union and Confederate veterans shake hands at the 50th anniversary Gettysburg reunion in 1913. Over 50,000 former soldiers met at the Blue-Gray Peace Jubilee, ending with a symbolic handshake along the Old Stone Wall as President Woodrow Wilson honored them on July 4th. A British intelligence agent moves through Ottoman-held Damascus in 1918 disguised in a full veil, a common tactic to slip past patrols. Weeks later, Arab revolt fighters and allies captured the city, severed the Hejaz Railway, and ended 4 centuries of Ottoman rule. Baghdad's night sky erupts with tracer fire and surface-to-air missiles as Iraqi air defenses answer the opening coalition strikes of Operation Desert Storm on January 17, 1991. The first wave targeted radar and command sites, while anti-aircraft guns swept the horizon with red arcs. German-American Bund members march at Camp Nordland, New Jersey on July 18, 1937, carrying U.S. flags alongside party symbols. The Bund claimed up to 20,000 members and ran rallies and youth camps until authorities shut Camp Nordland in 1941. Australian troops of the Imperial Camel Corps line up near Rafah, Egypt on January 26, 1918, during the Sinai-Palestine campaign. Camels gave them range and steady transport across dunes where horses failed, aiding Allied advances against Ottoman positions. In 1992, American evangelist Billy Graham preached at Moscow's Olympijski Stadium with big outdoor screens carrying his message to overflow crowds. It was among the first large public faith rallies in post-Soviet Russia, a sign of new openness after the USSR ended. Irish Citizen Army volunteers take rooftop positions in Dublin hours before the Easter Rising of 1916. Formed by trade unionists under James Connolly, this small workers' militia helped seize key sites like the General Post Office. U.S. sailors line up for a beard contest in 1944, a morale booster many ships held after long deployments. With fresh water and razors rationed at sea, captains often allowed Liberty beards, and crews gave prizes for the best growth and neatest trim. Finnish troops in a timber-lined trench on the Karelian Isthmus, June 16, 1944. The front soldier grips a captured PPSH-41 drum mag submachine gun, a favorite nicknamed Peltiheikki. Days later, the Tali-Ihantala fighting became the largest battle in Nordic history and halted the summer push. Nome's Front Street, 1900. The Alaska Gold Rush swelled the town from a handful of tents to over 20,000 people in one season. Among the crowded signs is the Dexter Saloon, co-owned by Wyatt Earp, serving prospectors who were scooping gold from the nearby beach. Russian troops on the Eastern Front in 1916 prepare cylinders and don Zelinsky-Kumant charcoal respirators before releasing a chemical cloud toward German lines. By then, the Empire had dedicated chemical units and even used over 1 million gas shells on some sectors. A 1959 U.S. bus station shows a colored waiting room, restaurant sign, a routine sight under state-mandated segregation. Federal action soon ended these barriers. An Interstate Commerce Commission order took effect in 1961. Jack Dempsey, Harry Houdini, and Benny Leonard share a stage gym moment in the early 1920s. Heavyweight King Dempsey and lightweight star Leonard flank the world's best escape artist. Houdini often invited body punches to prove his strength, while Dempsey and Leonard ruled their divisions. British circus strongwoman Joan Rhodes turns housework into training, casually hoisting her own sofa while dusting at home in 1958. Famous for stage feats like lifting men and even pianos, she made everyday strength look effortless. A TV camera at Comiskey Park captures the mood on July 12, 1979, when DJ Steve Dahl's Disco Demolition Night lured fans with discounted tickets for bringing old disco records. The pile was destroyed between games. Britons paused in pubs like this as Queen Elizabeth II addressed the nation after Princess Diana's passing in September 1997. The funeral coverage drew over 30 million viewers in the United Kingdom and billions worldwide, turning public spaces into quiet vigils. British soldiers brace behind a broken wall in Northern Ireland as fresh graffiti calls for the IRA, an everyday snapshot from the street clashes of the Troubles in the early 1970s. Armored patrols, curfews, and sudden checkpoints turned city blocks into tense front lines for years. Ronald McDonald debuted in 1963, created by TV weatherman Willard Scott, and soon headlined store openings like this one. A decade later, the smiling mascot helped launch Ronald McDonald House Charities in 1974. Sky painters in the 1930s brushed the Eiffel Tower by hand, often working without harnesses as Paris stretched below. Each repaint used tens of tons of paint, applied in 3 subtle shades, to keep its bronze fade glowing. Before dawn on 13 August 1961, East German crews launched Operation Rose, laying barbed wire and pouring concrete that turned city streets into a border within hours. The barrier soon wrapped 96 miles around West Berlin, with watchtowers and a wide buffer zone. In a modest Paris shed, Marie Curie measured faint rays that led her to discover polonium and radium, and she introduced the word radioactivity. She became the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, and the only person awarded in 2 different sciences. In 1931, Gandhi traveled with a portable spinning wheel, preaching Swadeshi, make your own cloth to loosen dependence on imported textiles. The humble charkha became a national emblem, even appearing on early Indian flags, a quiet badge of self-reliance and dignity. June 1969, outside the Stonewall Inn, a late-night police raid met unexpected resistance, sparking days of street protests in Greenwich Village. 1 year later, the first Pride March honored those nights, turning a neighborhood stand into a global movement for dignity and equality. June 1919, inside Versailles, delegates sealed the treaty that officially closed the First World War and redrew Europe's borders. Its severe payments and clauses destabilized Germany's economy and politics, creating conditions that later fueled a new European conflict. Christmas Eve 1914, German and British troops met in no man's land to trade small gifts, sing carols, and even kick a ball around before returning to their lines. This rare soldier-led pause spread along parts of the Western Front, but ended within days under orders from command. U-2 photos taken on October 14, 1962, exposed Soviet medium-range missile launch sites near San Cristobal, Cuba, and reached President Kennedy the next day. Those frames set off 13 tense days of secret talks and a naval quarantine, bringing the world to a near-nuclear standoff. In 1941, with invasion fears high, the Grenadier Guards tested a Thompson gun clamped to a Norton motorcycle during coastal defense drills at Swanage, Dorset. These improvisations, more experiment than standard kit. In 1948, Kentucky officials photographed the rough cabin where 37-year-old Raymond Ellison lived with his 12-year-old wife, a union made possible by a legal loophole. After the girl's death and Ellison's arrest, the Louisville Courier-Journal's coverage sparked public outrage and debate over child marriage laws in America. Forced laborers at Bell Baltlag carved the 227-kilometer White Sea-Baltic Canal at breakneck speed in 1932. Finished in just 20 months by over 100,000 inmates under harsh conditions, it became a stark showcase of Soviet industrial ambition and propaganda. Two gentlemen pause by Madrid's Puente de Toledo in 1910, sipping wine with the Baroque granite arches behind them. The bridge, designed by Pedro de Ribera and finished in the 1730s, once marked the road to Toledo and has survived Manzanares River floods for centuries. Paris, 1948. Ballerinas in tutus peek through a backstage door between scenes, curiosity beating stage fright. As Paris theaters revived after the war, candid moments like this became beloved press images of the city's returning sparkle. Jet-age luxury. Airlines in the 1960s rolled out in-flight buffets with chefs carving roasts and pouring champagne, sometimes beside spiral staircases to upstairs lounges. Tickets cost far more in today's dollars, but travelers got white tablecloth service, real silverware, and multi-course menus. Rhodesian distance star Matthias Kanda was so fast he once posed racing a steam locomotive while preparing for Mexico City in 1968. He never got to run. The entire Rhodesian team was barred that year over the country's segregation policy. In 1852, Queen Victoria posed with her children for a daguerreotype, then personally scratched her own face from the plate because she disliked how she looked. It is one of the earliest known cases of royal retouching, showing that even a queen edited photos long before Photoshop. A teenage graduate at a 1990s prom wears a minimalist slip dress with a bold cameo choker, pure decade style. The look captures the shift from flashy 80s glam to sleek 90s minimalism, when statement necklaces and simple silhouettes ruled red carpets and teen culture. Brazil, 1936, a coffee plantation worker whose lined face mirrors the grind behind the nation's black gold. In the 1930s, vast estates in São Paulo and Minas Gerais ran on intense manual labor from poor migrants and descendants of formerly enslaved people. A West Berlin photographer lashes out at an East German officer across the border during an anniversary protest at the Friedrichstrasse crossing, 13 August 1986. The date marked 25 years since the Berlin Wall went up, when one sidewalk belonged to two systems and a single step changed the rules. During the 1973 oil crisis in Germany, fuel was so tight that the country held car-free Sundays and some motorists improvised, like hitching ponies to a Volkswagen bus. The shock changed habits fast: new speed limits, a shift to smaller cars, and bigger plans for public transit across West Germany. Vesuvius erupts in March 1944, its last eruption to date, sending towering ash clouds over Naples at the height of World War II. The fallout buried nearby villages in cinders and even grounded Allied aircraft at local airfields. U.S. Air Force personnel stationed near Munich joined local Oktoberfest fun in Neubiberg in 1957, playing midway games beside a curious goose. Post-war Bavaria became a hub of American-German cultural exchange, as nearby Neubiberg Air Base let airmen sample Bavarian Fest traditions firsthand. Berlin hobbyists fine-tune an O-gauge locomotive at the city's Society of Model Railways in 1931, when German makers like Marklin and Bing set the global standard for precision tinplate trains. Clubs wired entire floor layouts with hand-built motors and nickel-silver track. Poland's famed Staniewski Circus stops in Krakow in 1934, showing a classic interwar crowd-pleaser, precision dog acts performed in front of their hand-painted wagon. Family-run troops like this crisscrossed Poland between the wars. Three chimpanzees pose as the classic See No Evil, Hear No Evil, Speak No Evil trio, an idea traced to a 17th century carving at Japan's Toshogu Shrine. The motif spread worldwide via postcards and ads in the early 1900s. From a shattered 1990s front line to a lively riverside city, Mostar rebuilt its heart and drew travelers back to its cafes and markets. The Stary Most Bridge was reconstructed in 2004 using traditional Ottoman techniques and added to UNESCO's World Heritage List in 2005. Post-war designers imagined space-age road trips with sleek, low-drag pods like this matching car and camper. Built from light fiberglass or aluminum to save fuel and glide through the air, they looked futuristic. but the tiny cabins made long rides a squeeze. MGM's Munchkins head to work in Culver City during filming in 1938, part of a troupe of roughly 124 actors who brought Munchkinland to life. Their scenes showcased cutting-edge Technicolor sets and makeup that helped make the 1939 classic unforgettable. Frank Sinatra unwinds at home in 1965 with his Labrador Ringo, named with a playful nod to Beatlemania. Behind him is a high-end Ampex reel-to-reel and TV, proof of the studio perfectionist's serious home hi-fi habit for previewing mixes. Robert Bloch pounds his typewriter in a book-crammed study, the mid-century pulp master who would publish Psycho in 1959. A protege of H.P. Lovecraft, he drew on a notorious Wisconsin case, and Alfred Hitchcock quietly bought the rights for about $9,500, then tried to snap up every copy to guard the twist. The Vagabonds, Thomas Edison, naturalist John Burroughs, automaker Henry Ford, and tire pioneer Harvey Firestone, pause atop a mill wheel during their 1918 road camping tour. Uniformed elevator attendants line the halls at Marshall Field & Cummer in Chicago, turning a simple ride into a choreographed service experience in the 1940s. They controlled doors, floor stops, and customer courtesy. At 18, she was still Norma Jean Dougherty, newly married, working in a wartime plant, and posing for casual street snapshots long before the name Marilyn Monroe existed. Royal Garrison artillery gunners muscle a BL 6-inch 26 calibre howitzer into place on the Balkan front, laying timber skids to drag its wooden wheels over mud in May 1917. 26 calibre marks the barrel and breech weight, and this workhorse could send a 100-pound round nearly 9,500 yards, standard kit of the British Salonika Force. Moonlit labor on the Western Front. British soldiers hauled duckboards to rebuild paths through knee-deep mud, while star shells arc overhead, January 1917. These slatted walkways cut sickness like trench foot and kept supply lines moving when rain turned the battlefield into a swamp. After Chile's 1973 coup, Santiago's National Stadium was turned into a vast detention center, with soldiers herding thousands of civilians into the stands. For weeks, the arena served as a makeshift hub for identification and interrogations before transfers, becoming one of the coup's starkest symbols.